am I possibly opening a can of worms again by talking about this? Probably, but I think the way Genshin treats its protagonist, aka the Traveler, has changed over the years, and I want to talk about it. The last time I made a video about the Traveler was in September of 2024. We have gotten 2 new regions since then, and a lot has changed. So where do I stand on the Traveler? I think in general, the Traveler has actually improved as a character. I'm not saying they're an amazing protagonist now, but in the more recent Archon quests, like in Not Krai, they actually spoke. They have their own opinions, and they're also shown to have more meaningful interactions with other characters. Are we finally seeing the death of the silent protagonist portrayal of the Traveler? I personally hope so. There's just something so refreshing about seeing them react to the events happening on screen instead of Paimon doing the reactions for them. There's also the fact that the plot is moving forward and the Traveler's role is becoming more and more central in the main story. So far, I really feel like they're going in the right direction, but there are some parts of the Traveler's writing and story that's always intrigued me. First, there's always been this divisive discussion on what role the Traveler should occupy as the protagonist of Genshin, and it's the witness versus the hero. And second is the alleged glazing that the Traveler gets by other characters. So basically, some players feel like they're not enough of a main character and they don't get enough special moments and they should actually get to be the center of the story. After all, they're the protagonist of the story, they should at least feel like they matter. And on the other end of that spectrum, we have the players who think the Traveler is being praised by other characters a bit too much, or at least more than they actually deserve. But before we get into all of that, I'm gonna use the protagonist definition that I used in my previous Traveler video. So a protagonist is defined as a character that moves the plot forward. They're the ones traveling through Teyvat and watching different events unfold in each nation that they visit. They're also the one actively pursuing their twin who went missing at the very beginning of the game. The plot moves forward by following the Traveler's journey. The protagonist can be the main character, but they're not always the same. The main character is the character that is heavily impacted by events in the story. They're not always the ones moving the plot forward, but they are vital characters to the story. For example, the Archons are the main characters of their respective regions' Archon quests, but they're not the main characters of the game because they're not always impacted by every event that takes place in the story. So with that established, I also want to make a disclaimer. I recorded this video before the last 2 acts of the Not Krai Archon quests, and I'm actually adding this in as I edit, and I just want to fully acknowledge that there have been major improvements in how the Traveler is portrayed and Not Krai's approach to the Traveler. It's just very different from before. I will address the Not Krai stuff at the end of the video, and as I edit, I will keep points that I still think are relevant to the Traveler as a character in the video. So if you want to avoid the Not Krai spoilers, it will be mostly at the end of the video. Everything else before that should be more or less a discussion about the Traveler before the last 2 acts of Not Krai. So yeah, there's that. Also, as usual, everything is my opinion. I'm not a professional video essayist. You are free to disagree with me. I think protagonists like the Traveler are always the most tricky because, like I said in my previous video about the Traveler, they're the type of protagonist that tries to appeal to a lot of people. There are the players who see the Traveler as an extension of themselves, like they try to immerse themselves in the world of Teyvat and interact with the characters through the Traveler. Therefore, it's not really a shock for some people to want the Traveler to be treated well and praised by other characters. To some players, they're not just a blank self-insert or a Gary Stu or Mary Sue, but they are the hero. And I also personally have some friends who enjoy the game this way, and it's not really wrong. It's just someone's preferred way of interacting with a piece of media. The isekai genre is also popular because countless people like to envision themselves and live vicariously through the protagonists of these stories. It's not wrong or a crime to imagine yourself to be the hero of a story or the main character of one. A notable trait of a blank slate protagonist or a self-insert is that the game will not give them too many personality traits. They can show empathy, courage, fear, but nothing that's too defining. These types of protagonists would usually have a fairly simple established motivation and background, and most importantly, they're often not given real agency in the story. The game will give you a false sense of agency, but nothing you decide for the Traveler will truly matter in the end. The obvious drawbacks of this is, of course, the inability for the protagonist of the story to experience real narrative growth, because in order to grow, you have to get from point A to point B, and that would defeat the purpose of being a blank slate or a character that everyone could see themselves in. And on the other side of that, there are also players who see the Traveler as another character. Now, full disclosure, I myself fall into this category. I don't see the Traveler as an extension of myself. I see them as a standalone character, and because I see them as a standalone character, I often get very frustrated with how the Traveler is portrayed as a protagonist or as a main character in some of the Archon quests. And the reason for that is my preference in consuming narratives within media is seeing the characters go through growth. And what I mean by that is that the protagonists, main characters, and antagonists all go through an arc where their internal world and beliefs are challenged by the events of the story. That's what makes redemption arcs so compelling to me, and probably to a lot of players with the same preferences as me. It's the understanding of why certain characters behave the way that they do and what motivates them. And to me, that's what makes a character believable as human beings. And of course, they need to have agency over their choices in the story. The drawback of this type of character portrayal given to the protagonist of a video game is that they will not always make the choice that we as the players like or approve of. Sometimes characters make very questionable decisions that we disagree with, and it will make them unlikable to a lot of people. There's always that risk of the protagonist accidentally alienating a big chunk of the player base. So with that in mind, I think we can all better understand why some players feel like the Traveler is overglazed like a donut, while some actually would prefer if they get more of the spotlight because, you know, they're supposed to be the most important character in the game and this is their journey. So all of these allegations of them being just a witness is nonsense, and they should stop getting sidelined by other characters. So I made the argument in my last video about the Traveler and how they should stay as a witness in order for them to be a consistent character, and I have gotten some feedback from you guys that that isn't an actual fix that we can make for the Traveler, and I think there's some really good points that I have to agree with here. I think while being the witness of the story does have some benefits to it, meaning it can help the other characters shine in the story and for the Traveler to be consistent in one role. The main obvious drawback of this role is that it would make the Traveler feel kind of irrelevant or useless, which is bad because they're the protagonist and making them just a witness would render them kind of pointless. So let's revisit the hero versus the witness debate of the Traveler. Okay, so way back in the olden days of Liyue, we're told by Zhongli that the Traveler has a very specific role in Teyvat, and that is the role of being a witness. They're a descender, an outsider, someone who is not affected by Irminsul and the laws of Teyvat. History cannot be rewritten with the Traveler present, hence why they're so important. And while this role is important, it is also a more passive role, and I think this was accurately portrayed in the earlier days of the Archon quest, specifically in Mondstadt, Liyue, Sumeru, and Fontaine. The Traveler was definitely more of a witness than a hero or main character of the Archon quest in the earlier regions. What I mean by this is that the events of the story would still have happened if the Traveler didn't have an extremely important role in the story. They're not completely irrelevant, but for example in Fontaine, the prophecy would have still taken place. Everyone would have still been in danger of drowning. The House of the Hearth would have still been present and tried their best to prevent it. Burina would still be performing her role as an Archon while helplessly watching the prophecy coming true. The giant ship would have still been built underneath the fortress. The Traveler sped up the events of the Archon quest, and they may have also altered the outcome, but they didn't become central to the story. The point is, we have no proof that the people of Fontaine would have failed without the Traveler's help. They're important, but not completely vital to the story. The same thing goes for the Liyue Archon quest. The whole point of that quest was for Zhongli to test the citizens of Liyue's abilities to survive a major threat without his guidance or direct involvement. The Traveler helped, and they were important in a lot of the moments in that quest, but they didn't really make like extremely important decisions that altered the course of the story. The same thing goes in Sumeru. Without the Traveler, Tignari, Alhaitham, and Sino would have already been suspicious of the academia, and a conflict would have erupted eventually. I'm not saying that the Traveler's presence is useless and they could be replaced by a houseplant and nothing in the story would change. That would be very inaccurate, but in the earlier Archon quests, they were never the main star of the story. The story doesn't really focus on them as a character, and not even on progressing their own storyline. The progression of the Traveler's personal journey only happens in the Dainsleif quests back then, and that's because the story is solely focused on the Abyss, so the Traveler automatically becomes the main character of that quest. Other than that, they're pretty much a witness to the story of Teyvat, and I actually like this portrayal of the Traveler because I think it lets the other other characters shine a lot more, and we have a cohesive story about the archons and the characters of that region without having the traveler, like steal the show or anything. However, I think we have started to see the game push the traveler into a more important role. They're a lot more central in Natlan. They're not the main character per se, but you can see that they are pushing the traveler more and more as the hero, or like at least one of the heroes. They participate in a lot of vital moments in the story. They are actually doing something important, and the game is finally utilizing their unique role as a descender to actually mean something in the story. I also think that this is expected at this point. We are 5 years into the story and some plot lines in Genshin are starting to converge, so the traveler will need to shine a lot more than they did in the past. And I also don't think the traveler being a hero is necessarily a bad thing. Just because I like the witness portrayal doesn't mean like I'm against the traveler feeling or being portrayed as a hero. In fact, having a hero protagonist can have its benefits. The hero can offer unique narrative points when done right. They can be the wild card and give hope to a hopeless situation. They can also have a unique relationship dynamic with the archons. They are also the perfect otherworldly hero to go against otherworldly villains, like the heavenly principles, for example. Potentially. The traveler specifically is also in a unique position where they can connect better with divine or immortal characters. For example, in the most recent Archon quest, the traveler was able to connect with Columbina better than other characters, which in a way is fitting for a character whose theme is isolation, like Columbina. Columbina never felt like she truly belonged with the Fatui or the Frostmoon Scions, so seeing her connect with the traveler who's also an outsider because they're a descender is actually believable and can make some interesting narratives if done right. In concept, I think it's more believable when immortal characters start sharing their burdens with the traveler, especially when there's proper build-up to it. This also relies heavily on how the interactions between the characters are framed, but it can make for some very believable and intense moments. For example, in the Fontaine Archon quest, where Furina was conflicted in whether or not she should confide in the traveler about Fontaine's prophecy and everything she's been enduring for 500 years, is actually still one of my favorite moments in the story. Mostly just because that moment was built up pretty well. The game just established how Furina is single-handedly enduring the burden of the prophecy and the task given to her by Focalor, and then she meets the traveler, someone who isn't bound to the rules of Teyvat, the exception. Their existence as the outsider adds narrative weight to this interaction, and Furina's conflict here is very believable. It's even better that she still hesitated despite knowing that the traveler might be able to help her. Although the traveler's role in Fontaine is more witness than hero, I just thought that the way the game portrayed and used the traveler's role as a descender actually adds interesting narrative value. The traveler absolutely can be the otherworldly hero that they are sold to be, but it does need a lot of development in order for the hero role to feel earned by the traveler. So this is where my personal biggest issue comes from when talking about the traveler's portrayal as the hero. And it's not because the traveler being pushed to be the hero is a bad thing. The problem isn't in the concept, but it's in the execution, as it usually is in Genshin. When I hear or read about traveler glazing, I always think of it as the traveler being praised for something that doesn't feel earned by them. They show up, help out, get to be in the spotlight for a bit, and all of the other characters will start praising them as the hero. In concept, it's actually like not that bad. They actually do stuff, they help out. There's really no problem with the characters liking and praising the traveler for all of they've done for Teyvat, but being the hero isn't the problem here. The traveler can absolutely be a hero, but the problem is that the game is in this weird state where the traveler being a descender is sometimes portrayed as also a fast-track solution given to solve most of the problems in one nation. It's like the game wants you to know the traveler is vitally important, like they are the key, but they don't really want to establish that or show you why. They just tell you that the traveler is special. I'm gonna use Natlan's Archon quest as an example of what I'm talking about here. Let's start with the premise of Natlan. When we get to Natlan, we learn that the entire nation is under threat due to the Abyss invasion that's been going on since Conria. And then there's also the concept of ancient names. Shilonen directly says that the recipient of an ancient name must have done something in their lifetime that exemplifies the spirit of the name. The recipient may not understand exactly why they were selected, but most will strive to live up to the name. Natlan is also fated for destruction, and the Traveler special here because they have this unique ability to cleanse and repel the abyss and abyssal corruption, which is actually something that's established all the way back in Mondstadt. So that's actually good continuity in terms of storytelling for the Traveler, and also further establishing the use of their unique ability. So back to the ancient name stuff first. It's a unique concept to Natlan, and I'm not against the Traveler getting an ancient name. It's just that the concept of an ancient name is that the bearer of the name has to strive to live up to it, and we see this in the Archon quest with Kachina's journey and the character growth that she goes through in order to live up to her name. The Traveler is given the name Tumaini, which means hope, and I do think it actually fits the Traveler quite well in concept. Natlan is destined for destruction, and the Traveler is the exception to the laws of Tevat. If anyone can change fate, it's the Traveler. Hence, they are hope. It's quite fitting. It's just that with the amount of time that they spent in the quest trying to forge the Traveler's name, they ended up focusing on the wrong thing, in my opinion. The quest is so focused on the logistics of forging the name instead of making it a meaningful character moment for the Traveler. The game establishes that making an ancient name for an Outlander is extremely difficult, but it's possible because the Traveler has helped out a lot and has done a lot of good deeds in helping Natlan fight the abyss. And sure, I can buy that the Traveler is deserving of an ancient name because they've been a huge help, but the fact that the Traveler already did the helping, which is just what someone would do if they see an entire group of people fighting against a horde of monsters, it kind of takes away the meaningful experience that should have been the central focus of this ancient name plotline. From the Natlan character's perspective, it makes sense that the Traveler embodies hope in the never-ending darkness of fighting against the abyss. The Traveler is quite literally a shining golden beacon of hope, but from the player's perspective, this is just another Tuesday for the Traveler. That's why the forging of their ancient name doesn't carry a lot of narrative weight. So when the Traveler gets praised for all of their deeds in Natlan, it feels unearned, especially when the quest focuses on the how-tos of forging the ancient name instead of why it's so meaningful for the Traveler to have that name and how that connects with the other characters in Natlan, especially, you know, the other ancient name bearers that we meet and never really got any screen time. From how I see it, like my own experience as a player, the Traveler arrives in Natlan, they help out as any decent person would when people are being mauled to death by abyssal monsters. They also already came pre-installed with the ability to cleanse abyssal corruption. And then I see the game automatically making all of that into a fast track in getting an ancient name for the Traveler. Hence, there's no real story in why they should be getting an ancient name. Other than they're the main character, it's kind of important, they should have one, it would be cool. They also already have like a bunch of heroic deeds, and so that makes them a hero technically. And that's one of the requirements to have an ancient name. So give them an ancient name. That's the main issue here. They've already lived up to it without going through any kind of growth as a character and the trials and tribulations that a person has to go through in order to strive and live up to their given ancient name. For example, Kachina has the ancient name Utabithi, which means resilience, and she quite literally has to deal with people undermining her on a daily basis, fight in a tournament with barely any confidence, and then die. This entire character arc that took place in the Archon quest is what makes her ancient name feel very earned to me as a player. If the game also had just told me she's resilient without showing how she really grew as a character and how she embodied that resilience, her ancient name will also feel unearned and not as important to her as a character. So the ancient name plotline would have been better if it focused on the Traveler being the hope for the people of Natlan and how their actions slowly started to light hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. So in the end, the point of the Traveler even having an ancient name is so that they could back up Mawika in the Night Kingdom, and they did end up backing her up, and we got this cool scene of the final fight, which even though is very cool, it lacks the narrative impact that it's supposed to have. The Traveler to me feels like they're there because, well, they're the protagonist and they should get to shine in the most important moments and look cool because that's what a main character should be like. But it feels hollow, like there was no payoff to something that was supposed to be satisfying and well earned. The heroes of Natlan finally took down the abyss after centuries of sacrifice and resilience, but all I could think of was, oh cool, that's a cool scene, and nothing else about the story. But again, that is just my experience. If you like that scene, you like that scene. I'm not here to argue with you. And again, I'm not hating on the Traveler. I'm just pointing out some of the corners corners that the game has written themselves into. They want the traveler to be worthy of praise, but the story often hands them a fast-track solution to the main conflict of the story, which is why their hero portrayal is weaker than their witness one. I'm not gonna talk about meta and stuff, but one of the things that the characters in the game glaze the traveler for is their strength. And I just find it to be such a shame that this isn't handled very well, because the game just refuses to establish just how strong the traveler is supposed to be. Like, the descender is great, and the game seems to want us to believe that the traveler has exceptional powers, but it also can't be too powerful that they can bulldoze their way through every other character in the game, because otherwise there will be no stakes in the story. Did you know that New Villette, the reincarnation of the Hydro Sovereign, says in his Ascension voice line that he has to get serious to match the Traveler? So with this in mind, the Traveler could easily take out most of the major characters in game, right? Having this voice line makes the Traveler's fights against weaker antagonists like Child, for example, in the Liyue Archon quest seem kind of silly. Like, the tension and stakes of that fight is just gone narratively, like when you know the Traveler can just one-shot Child, considering New Villette took him out with no problem. But when the game wants a certain character to win over the Traveler, like for example Arlecchino, the Traveler is portrayed as strong but not god level strong that some characters make them out to be. Suddenly, they're just strong enough to have a fair fight with the fourth of the Fatui Harbingers. You know what? Every time I see this discussion, it's just so silly to me. Like, some people really don't like that the Traveler lost to Arlecchino because it breaks the all-powerful Descender story that the game feeds us from time to time. But the other half is also like, well, Arlecchino should be strong, if not stronger, considering her lore. And then there are also the people who are always going like, why isn't the Traveler using their elemental powers more? Which is actually the most damning proof that the writers want the Traveler to be super strong and cool, or at least stronger than most of the characters in the game. But they also realize that making your main character so OP right off the bat kills the stakes of the story. So the Traveler just comes in swinging with their sword against someone like Arlecchino, when it's really just a failure in writing the Traveler's strength. There's also some mentions of the Traveler's real powers being sealed off by the Heavenly Principles, which I actually can believe. But there's really not enough information that's out right now to even speculate on what it does. But to me personally, if this does end up being the case, then it's basically a narrative safety net. It's a safety net for the game to go and sell the Traveler as someone who's not above every character in the game, because, you know, their powers are sealed. So some characters will get to shine as more powerful, people will pull for them more, but also at the same time, the Traveler is a god, just a sealed god. And until then, the Traveler is an underdog, which in my opinion is kind of a shame. If only they had expanded and emphasized on the sealed power stuff more, and then focused more on the Traveler trying to gain back their strength throughout their journey in Teyvat, and see them gradually gaining strength from different elements as the story progresses, it would have been an interesting narrative and character arc for the Traveler. In that scenario, the Traveler would be clearly handicapped, and they would actually need a ton of effort to reach god level again. So we as the players will see the Traveler, like, you know, struggle in fights, and we will see it as believable because their real powers are sealed. And maybe the Traveler can constantly be frustrated by this, and then we see more of them like mastering different elemental powers, starting with Animo and then Geo and then Electro, until they eventually mastered them all and they earn back their god level status. About the master swordsman argument, I don't really mind that. I can find it believable that the Traveler is a master swordsman. I just wish that whenever they're in a fight scene, that it's more, you know, like consistently portrayed that they are limited to using their sword fighting skills because of the handicap, and that's why they can sometimes lose to other characters. I can definitely buy that. The thing that bothers me is just how the elemental powers that the Traveler gains is used as a party trick at this point. Okay, so post not cry update, this is no longer the case. The Traveler is now consistently using their elemental powers, and I love to see it. But before this, the fact that they were so inconsistent in using their elemental powers does make the portrayal of their strength kind of inconsistent, because sometimes, you know, they're strong and then they just don't use their elemental powers at all. So that gives an illusion of the traveler just being strong for no reason. There was no special powers that they use. They're just strong, period. And that to me is how the traveler is portrayed before the not cry fix. This to me adds to why the traveler being the hero feels weaker narratively than being the witness. And this isn't an argument to say that they shouldn't be the hero because they're already strong. I'm just explaining why I think this inconsistency in strength and power scaling makes the praise that the traveler gets in the game feel so hollow. And it's not the fault of the traveler as a character, it's just another pitfall of wanting them to be two things at once: the underdog you can root for and the god the game wants them to be. It also doesn't help that meta-wise the traveler is just not good, so players will always feel that gap between being constantly told that the traveler is powerful, but then they aren't even usable in the game. I'm not saying that they have to make the traveler incredibly broken. I personally think if they are at least viable for like end-game content, the gap between player experience and what the in-game characters is experiencing wouldn't be this massive. This is actually something that I think Genshin has been doing in the more recent Archon quest. I think they did a bit of this during Sumeru too, but now it's more prominent, and it's the use of multi-perspective storytelling. Most of Genshin's story is told through the traveler's eyes, and because they used to be very silent and Paimon used to say everything for them, this locks the traveler into the cameraman role, and any praise or recognition will always fall kind of flat if we constantly follow the traveler and then see them just not really doing anything important that affects the story and having very little to say and then being forced into the final fight just because, and all of that can make it feel unearned. But I think they've actually improved in Not Cry. The traveler and other important characters had entirely separate parts in the quest. For example, we had an entire segment of the quest just following Nefer because it was important to the story, but we also had an entire segment following the traveler, and this actually gave time for other characters to shine and do their own thing, being established as proper individual characters, so we as a player have reasons to care about them. But we also get to see how exactly the traveler contributes to the story. Having the story follow Nefer for quite literally the entirety of Warrior's backstory, instead of the traveler being the one to do it, or even just having them present during that time, automatically shows how the other characters are vital to solving the crisis currently at hand. It shows just how much unique contribution the characters added to the narrative without having to rely on the traveler. And the traveler is also not rendered useless or just the witness or cameraman anymore. They're also in a very important segment of the story. They're still adding to the story without stealing any spotlight or just standing around while the banner characters are doing all of the important stuff. This way, the traveler is vitally important to both the progression of the story and the fate of the other characters. This also helps with the problem of players constantly being told the story by Paimon. This is just something that's inevitable when we're seeing the story through the traveler's eyes because they're silent and is now established as a quiet person. But following another character for some parts of the story means Paimon isn't present to spell out everything anymore. This lets the players to experience the story through showing and not telling by the game, which to me personally makes it more engaging because the dialogue is automatically just less bloated, and the moments that we do have with Paimon feels a lot more enjoyable. I'm not saying the current execution is perfect, but I think it's heading in the right direction, and I welcome that. I actually want the story of Genshin to be good and more engaging, and the traveler is incredibly important in the game's ability to make that happen. So I will always give credit where credit's due. The game needs to find a balance in what they're trying to do with the traveler, and having this multi-perspective lens can actually help them in establishing the traveler both as the cool protagonist they want them to be, and also giving a significant chunk of the story's importance to the other major characters involved. It will make the traveler's presence in the more important moments of the Archon quest a lot more rewarding and earned. Guys, I just finished the Not Cry Archon quest. Like, I literally just finished it, and I feel like it would be a bit of a crime to not talk about the Traveler in the last two acts of the Not Cry quests, especially the Traveler and Dottore scene that we got. I think this is the first time in the game that I genuinely feel like the Traveler feels like a protagonist and a main character, both hero and witness at the same time. I think this scene was so good because it acknowledges the Traveler's unique position as a descender. It gives insights to their thoughts and values, And to make that scene even better, the story actually directly challenges the traveler's beliefs and ideals. I think this is the first protagonist versus antagonist moment that feels so authentic because it's interested in showing the clash of ideals between two characters rather than to just sell the players an idea of what that character should be. And because the game is prioritizing that moment to show who the traveler is as a character within the narrative, there's no random showing off of their powers. Instead, the traveler made an observation that they're not strong enough to take on Batory. There's no power of friendship upgrades, no magical power upgrades that suddenly saved them from that situation. They finally feel like a character because they're finally being treated like one. They have agency, they react, and they spoke. They have spoken so much in the last 2 acts, I am actually floored. It was actually a groundbreaking scene for me. I mean, it doesn't make them a perfect character or protagonist, but guys, it is miles away from where we've started. Another thing I really liked is just the traveler talking to Paimon. It's not just another dialogue option that we get and seeing the traveler like throwing a smile towards Paimon, you know, the usual one. There's actual banter here and I live for it. This is what I've always wanted. I'm genuinely so excited to see more of the traveler's growth as a character. If this is the direction that they're sticking with, I am all for it. There's even a scene of the traveler touching on his role of a hero given to them by the people of Teyvat. You have no idea how much I love the scene of the traveler. And it's not for some shallow reason like, oh, the traveler has a dark side. It's not about that. It's actually more about how complex it is for them to hold the title of hero when they've never asked for it. There's also this interesting concept that I feel like the game is dabbling with in the Not Cry Archon quest, and it's the identity crisis that the traveler is kind of facing. It's interesting that they as a character feel like the label hero is being forced onto them by everyone in Teyvat, and this title, as Dottore would point out, doesn't always benefit them. It's that it hasn't really helped them in reaching their goal in finding their sibling. It's almost like a weight on them given by both the characters of Teyvat and players like you and I. The labels of hero and witness is something that they didn't ask for, and it's interesting to see how it's starting to affect them. I will talk about the traveler and Dottore's interaction and overall Not Cry stuff in a separate Not Cry video because I really want to make one. I just wanted to address the changes and improvements on the traveler here because I think releasing this video without acknowledging the major changes that's been made to how the traveler is portrayed in the game just doesn't feel right to me. Like I said, credit where credit's due. Also, this part is very unscripted. Like I just finished the quest, like I've been locked in there for 6 hours, and honestly, I like the portrayal of the traveler here. So on to the conclusion. So that's all I have to say really. I just wanted to talk about the traveler again because I have seen some changes in the direction of how the traveler is portrayed in the game. They have more voice lines. I think they spoke more in Not Cry than they did in Mondstadt, Liyue, and Inazuma combined. In fact, I remember vividly people being so surprised when the traveler actually had a voice when screaming Nahida's name in the Sumeru Archon quest. So seeing them converse with other characters, having opinions, and also having the balanced role of a witness and hero of the overarching story is, in my opinion, the right direction. I think not making them the solution to everything and showing that they have to struggle in order to succeed in the face of adversity is what will make the praise and the glazing that the traveler gets feel a lot more earned. Genshin has to show the players how great the traveler is to the other characters too, and not just have them constantly tell us how valuable and strong they are. And in order to do that, the traveler will have to continue to make believable and meaningful connections with the characters in the story. AKA, it cannot be out of nowhere, nor can it be too much fan service. I welcome fan service, but not too much of it because it breaks the narrative. This is also becoming more important than ever since most of the plot lines in the Teyvat chapter is converging, and the traveler is the protagonist and the main character of the story, considering this is their journey in finding their twin and discovering the truth in the world of Teyvat. So improvements are really needed here. So yeah, I'm excited to see the traveler continue to evolve as a character. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, and consider subscribing if you want. If not, that's also fine, but it would mean so much to me. I hope everyone's doing well, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.